Hello. Hello. I'm Karen Jenkins-Johnson, Principal of Jenkins-Johnson Gallery in San Francisco and New York. Thank you for joining us. My team and I hope that you're healthy, safe, and well during these very challenging times. We welcome you to our 18th Conversation on Culture, a discussion with artists, curators, and collectors on current art world topics. Today, we have a very special guest, Zoé Whitley, who will introduce Professor Dewey Crumpler. First, let me take a little time and speak about Zoé. She was born in Washington, D.C. and spent her teenage years in Los Angeles. Zoé has a BA in art history from Swarthmore College in Philadelphia, a master's in history of design from the Royal College of Art, London. In 2003, she joined the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, where she worked as a curator for 8 years. In 2013, she took a curatorial position at the Tate, where she has had many notable exhibitions, including Soul of a Nation, Art in the Age of Black Power. Zoé curated the British Pavilion at the 58th Venice Biennale in 2019. She is currently director of Chisenhale Gallery, London. Zoé was chosen by Frieze to curate a special section at Frieze London, Possessions, Spirituality, and the Art of Our Time. Zoé lives and works in London with her family. Welcome, Zoé and Dewey.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you so much, Karen. And believe me, Dewey is the special guest. So to have Professor Crumpler here is really an honor. It is my pleasure to be able to provide a few words by way of introduction. And that begins, I think, in many ways with a kind of an acknowledgement of how artists come to curatorial attention or how they allied curatorial attention. I think that is also part of the story. And so I would like to acknowledge my friend, a collaborator, and a brilliant academic, Dr. Sempata Aranke, who actually first introduced me to Professor Crumpler's work. I think it's always important to give credit where it's due. It's part of, I think, a deep and rich tradition within our African American culture, and it's not something that I want to let down. With group exhibitions, I think it's important to understand that they're telling a story and not the story. And Professor Crumpler, as a painter, has actually lived many lives and many afterlives. And indeed, his work, his contribution to the canon of art history in America and beyond really makes so much sense within a context like Soul of a Nation. The fact that that Professor Crumpler was someone who, from a very early age, was committed to positive representations of we as a people through murals and otherwise, I think is an important place to begin, because as we see these variations within the practice that take on more or less abstract veins, the fact that a commitment to our history and a deep respect of that is something that inflects all of the work. Within a curatorial context that relates specifically to Frieze London, and our 2020 presentation was virtual rather than physical, the works were no less present. And I began by thinking about a quote from a late artist. So his spirit in many ways informs the project. That painter is Noah Davis, a young painter who was living and working in Los Angeles and co-founded with his wife, the brilliant artist Karen Davis, and an equally brilliant kind of creator of visuals, Khalil Joseph, his brother, a really formidable space called the Underground Museum. And he has this wonderful quote about the nature of painting and spirituality. And he said, "I think like painting, spirituality makes many people very uncomfortable. Spirituality is an interesting word. It's a highly underrated in contemporary painting, and I feel it is the driving force behind the practice. Any attempt for me to verbalize the act of painting will ultimately fail, but it is the spiritual nature of painting that makes it different from any other art form. The practice has a history so vast and forgotten, it can only exist in the land of spirits." And so when I began researching artists who I had hoped would take part in what was intended to be an international and intergenerational conversation about the very notion of spirituality, Dewey Crumpler came immediately to mind as someone who, even in conversations with me, really impressed upon me how important it was to be moved by the spirit, even in the act of painting. One of the paintings within the Frieze exhibition is called Spirit Flash, and is from a wider series that was first shown at the California African American Museum that related to tulips and shadows. And as I'm sure you will have elaborated for you in far better ways than I can, I was very interested in the notion of Dewey Crumpler starting with a living thing, with flowers, with picking them from a meadow, and with creating an archive within sketchbooks, and those impressions then taking on a life of their own. And the way that these forms not only reflect the natural world, but actually became symbolic for, again, African Americans as people, we as a people being able to open up, to be expansive, to rise from the dirt. There's that wonderful quote that, has almost become a platitude, but I think it's such an important one. They tried to bury us, but they didn't know we were seeds. So there's fundamentally this sense of resurrection in the work. And I think that this way of thinking about spirituality in an expansive way that goes beyond maybe a strictly religious or biblical sense, but that relates to one's deep-seated motivations for the act of creation is something that is so important. And I know that you will get a huge amount out of today's talk. So thank you for listening. I hope that everyone has a beautiful day, whether it's ending as it is here in London, or whether it's beginning as it may be on the West Coast. For those of you in the middle of the day, all I can say is you're in for a very special treat. So thank you.
Thank you, Zoe, and thank you so much. This has just been so wonderful and awesome.
Let me just say thank you, Zoe. I appreciate your words. To have you select my work was a great honor. And I hope one day you can actually see the work in person, although, as you point out, it was quite present in the virtual world. But hopefully, once this is over, we will pass again. And I deeply appreciate your work, which is the great thing, that you, among others, including Sam, are really the flowers of the future who will reshape art history so that people like me no longer have to search endlessly for images. We have explicators, speakers, people who can make our work present. And for that, I honor you, and I deeply appreciate your words and your really struggle to maintain that high standard that I see in your work. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Dewey. It's an honor. Everything you've said, I give it back 100-fold. So thank you. I am deeply, deeply appreciative of your work, of your life, of everything you've given to us. So thank you.
Well, have a great day and thank you. A great evening. I'm sorry. Yes.
Zoe, you be well.
Be
Okay.
safe.
All right. All right. That was awesome. Woo!
Yes.
Dewey.
She's amazing.
Yes. Here. High five.
Absolutely.
There we go.
Absolutely.
All right. Wonderful. Thank
To you for putting it together. I mean, that's amazing. And also, Karen, let me say my propers to you, because without you, none of it is possible. Not only for me, but for what you have done for so long to insist on Black presence. Not only Blacks, but art that really addresses the present. And it is that presencing that your attention and commitment makes possible that makes it really a great thing that I was able to communicate and come with you. And I appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm humbled. Well, Dewey, let's get to it. So this is a beautiful day here in the Bay Area, and I hope it's wonderful wherever you guys are today. And Dewey, I just want to say something. This is our part 2 to speaking with Professor Crumpler. During the first session, we were just, I think we were in our second month of actually a lot of us were still quarantined, and we're still in the middle of the pandemic. And somebody had said to me, one of your former students, Dewey, and I know I've said this to you before, but one of your former students said it was just, he felt better just hearing your voice. Just the sound of your voice was very calming and hopeful to him. So that you are just, I can't say it enough, you're a beloved professor here in the Bay Area. We love you here, you're making a difference here. And your travels around the globe have brought us here to this series with your tulips. Can you just tell us a little bit about how you got going with the series and bring in the spirituality element to it? Thank you.
Well, I will, Karen, and thank you. I was introduced to Holland by a friend, Raymond Saunders. We were in 1993 on a sort of mission that he had put together to organize a global conference of African American artists. Not only African American artists, but diasporic artists of African descent. And so he had commandeered, because of his relationship with the French government, a facility in the Senate, in the state Senate in Paris, and in the Luxembourg Gardens. And so one evening we were discussing Van Gogh and the extraordinary painting that many of those paintings, but a specific painting. And so his dealer said, why don't we go tomorrow to Amsterdam? And I said, this is the first time I'd been in Europe. So I thought, man, that's going to take 2 or 3 days, and I'm not going up there. And they said, no, we can be up there shortly. And so we went, and on the way up, Ray, who is also a great painter of tulips, sort of knew my sensibility. We were colleagues teaching in the same institution, and been friends for quite some time. So he took a side trip to see my reaction. And we wound up at this place. And I can't even express it. All I can say is that the grounds had a wonderful haze, a kind of early morning haze. And it was crisp, very crisp. And in the distance, those trees sort of faded into various shades of gray. And I was looking at this really extraordinary vision, and I saw these flowers, where the light broke through the haze, they sort of sprayed across the tops of these tulips that were moving gently in the breeze. And I thought, man, look at the way those flowers articulate and how they're moving in relationship to the air and the light. Like they keep orienting toward the light. They don't they refuse to stay on the axes. That is to say, straight.
Yes.
They yield slightly to gravity. And I thought, man, look, what is this? And then I began to look very closely at them. And the only way I could absorb them was to take out my sketchbook and start trying to draw them. And Ray, who had been to this place dozens of times in his lifetime, saw me over there frantically trying to capture this extraordinary moment. And he said, "Hey man, you just wasting time, blood." He said, "Man, you need to come on, man. We got to get through here." I said, "Man, y'all go on. Because I have to look, I have to do this." So they walked on. And then I thought, he's right. There is no way to capture this flower. This flower is not capturable. What I need to pay attention to is what it did to me. That's what I need to think about. What did it do to me? What was it about that movement, that articulation, that color variety? That's what I need to understand. And so I took out my camera and started filming. And because I had to have an image of this, but I quit drawing it. And then when I got back to Paris, after being dazzled by Van Gogh and the Rijksmuseum and seeing Rembrandt and all those great paintings, including those tulip paintings that my man had put together. And I thought, oh, okay, those still lifes, this object has been engaged through time. And that's when I started thinking about its encounter in the world. As we were making our way back to Paris, in the car, listening to Monk and Chopin, I started thinking, this object has seen the world in multiple ways, and its encounter with the world is absolutely like our encounter with the world. What the world and our encounter with it, particularly in the 15th century, yielded. And that flower began to make sense to me, not as a flower. I was never try to capture that flower. But when I got back to my apartment, this stuff started tumbling out. And I started going and finding images in those wonderful bookshops in Paris and magazine racks. And when we went to Aix, I got more, and Marseille. So everywhere I was going, I was collecting images. And I was coming back and putting them down in this sketchbook. And so I loaded this sketchbook up with my impressions, with my feelings. And that, of course, stayed with me and started my pursuit of trying to understand this object and its history in relationship to the subtleties that I thought were so prominent in the history of African thought. So it is in that context that I really started to pursue the tulip as an image. There's another image that I'd seen earlier, which was a object from Africa. And it was a metal object, and I saw it in a book. And it was, in the book, referred to as a slave collar.
Mm-hmm.
And when I looked at it, I saw it looked like a body, like somebody looking down on a body. And the central portion of it, the absence, as we would think of it, was really a central mode of being for me, because it very much looked like a body from above, like you're looking down on a body. So the shoulders and the head, which is the space between those two hemispheres. And its interior, that space, that what I thought of as potentiality, I began to go into that and really deal with those objects. And part of the reason I was struck by those tulips is because a tulip bud looks like that interior of that form. And that made me associate the tulip with a Black body, or with a body, because of the history of the use of this object. This object in Africa was a object of joy, of musicality. It has an element in it. When you move it, it makes noise. So it was used in ritual and song, and worn on the feet or worn on the hand. And that, like the people's, was brought into being because of its alluding to the human form. And that's why it took on that shape. While it could do the work that it was meant to do, it still subtly referred to a larger cosmic spiritual framework. And that's up deep up into African thought, how they take and transform imagery so that the subtlety of representation is inferred. Therefore, it does not have to mimetically trap something in time and space by reproducing it as an image of reality, as, say, the Greeks would, or Rembrandt. But it could take that form and deal with it as a metaphorical object that alludes to the possibilities. That's what Picasso picked up. He saw, bam, that's it. I can take anything and put it together, and it will suggest exactly what the thing is in all of its dynamics. So bam, I can take that bicycle butt support, take the handlebars, and put them on that form, and I got the thing that trips me out, which is a bull. Now, that's Africa opened up that territory. That encounter, that opened it. Now, that subtlety creates modernity. So that object is an object taken from Africa in all its musicality and turned into an object that is placed on a Black person who is a piece of property and is treated as if they are a cow. And because it makes noise, not music, noise, white noise, in fact, it now is transmuted into an object of oppression because of the psychology of the person who turned it into that kind of object. That's about mind. That's about how one perceives the world, how one translates the world from that which can be used to bring something subtle and interesting to that which can be used to subdue. And in the subduing, in the twisting and turning of the object into a object of repression, you can capture that mind in the center of that object and turn it into your use. And that's why that shape became, for me, the tulip, which, like this form that I had learned that Africans had reached through time and touched me to use this object as an object of investigation that would permit something that could speak through its beauty and its subtlety to do the work that for the next 10 years or so would drive my interest. And so the tulip, like it did for Ray in a different way, and like it did for Rembrandt, became the subject that could help me get to a deeper interest that I had, that waned me off of the need for the body. And by that, I do not mean that I would not deal with the Black body. The Black body is essential. The Black body is always in joy and terror in the United States. In joy and in terror. And therefore the Black body, for me as a child to the time I became 40 years old, was an essential instrument. But I was looking for something that could go deeper, not running away from the Black body, but concentrating on me for the thing that created the Black body and its use in space and time and its capacity for transformation, which meant that the Black body is really governed by the Black mind. And so my interest is in how the mind operates, how that thing between those two hemispheres, between your ears, as Sun Ra says,
Yes.
make space the place. And so it is in that context that that space now turned into a tulip, now turned into paint, became the subject of my inquiry.
Woo, preach, brother, preach. Woo! Sorry, I just had to go through me. That was dynamic, Dewey. Woo! Thank you so much. That was just tingling still.
Well,
let's talk about cosmic. Let's talk about, take that and let's look at the cosmic tablet, I think, which is a great segue into your use of the tulip and the body and African heritage. Could we speak a little bit about this cosmic tablet?
Sure. Well, among African thought, Africa is an extraordinarily diverse country, as we know, continent, I'm sorry. Africa is an extraordinarily diverse continent with hundreds and hundreds of groups of people and thousands of different ways of perceiving within their cultural group. But there were several cultural groups that really animated my interest. And as a younger person, I tried to appropriate African imagery directly, sort of mimetically copying it. Sort of like Picasso when he used those masks in La Demoiselle d'Avignon. I had thought that's the key. Take the object, paint it, put it in a form. But that was similar to Ray saying, look, man, you can't paint that. So, you know, I thought, like MC Hammer, you can't touch that. Leave that alone. So within that context, I started to pay attention to what I was teaching, because I had been teaching about African cosmology for many years. And I had been reading from a youth, as I was reading Plato and Aristotle and the Bhagavad Gita. I was reading all this stuff to become more spiritually aware. And then, you know, a brilliant friend of mine, brilliant, said, man, read this. And it was Conversations with Ogatumele. This was about 1974. I was finishing up a mural at Washington High School, and I started reading this. And it was so outside, so crazy, so insane, until it just soaked me into it. And I tried for 20 years to break it apart. And of course, it led me, that deep reading led me to the ideas of the Luba, which is also another group of people in Central Africa. And the Luba have a form that operates as a tablet or a signatory of memory, of time, and is composed of beads and various things that are carried by priests, people who have deep knowledge, and they record families, family history, some in a physical way. And so these forms, these memory boards became objects that I began to use and refer to the cosmos, because I was interested in how to negotiate space. And in terms of space, the minute you speak of space, time is implied, and time is memory. So once I brought those two together, this object became central. So I broke it into axes, the central axes, and its expansion, north, south, east, and west. And so within that, I brought what is essentially multiplicity. When east, north, south, and west converge in the center post, a circle. If you draw a line from one part to another, you get a square. So, of course, Leonardo used this as a symbol for the Vitruvian man. This idea of the expression of everything. Well, I wasn't genderizing space and time, because space and time don't have no ignorant ass shit, excuse me, stuff like a gender. What is gender in space and time? I mean, even when you're talking about God, you're talking about, anyway, God, a force. So what is that force? Expansion. How does that force expand? Space and time. Consciousness, center post. when you articulate and you want to bring down the forces so that they can create transformation, you have to produce a ritual context. And that ritual grows out of a seed, the seed of consciousness, the beginning, the Om, that one, that's where it is. It is not 2, 3, or 4 things. It's one thing, and it encompasses everything. That is precisely why I try to manifest this in the framework of the tulip, because the tulip, that stem, the center post, is guided by polarities. It operates like the precession in the macro reality of the universe. The earth tends to remain at rest, like my man said, unless acted upon consciousness by a force of equal or greater mass. Now that's of course a literalization of a cosmic event. And an African can express that same dynamic in their own way. And that's why I thought the use of the center post and its expansion into multiplicity carries the 2 basic elements, which is the square and the circle. And from the point of view of ancients, those expressions have a genderization, that is to say, and Pythagoras turns this into a specific, and Plato makes it into something that has hierarchy. But my expression is in the African dominion, which means that there is an articulation which has to do with a particular kind of thought that expresses itself as a square or as a line, and another thought which expresses itself when that line encounters another line and turns into a circle. So in that way, expansion, that could be seen as negative and positive, or male and female. However you say it, it's one, and neither one has more significance than the other, because when you got polarity, which is a state of nature or being, if you move one part, the other part's gone. So therefore, no matter what you do, no matter what you do, no matter how you engage it, it remains it. And therefore, it is the purpose of this encounter. And those things falling in its center post is the seeds of consciousness, which are cast into the firmament. And as they articulate, they speak to a specific time, a specific context, and they can be read by a very sensitive organism. They can be read. And in that reading, they can give input on how you might arrange your relationship to these polarities or these hemispheres. So that's a long-winded explanation for that image.
That's a beautiful, beautiful explanation, and I wanted the audience to hear this, because when you first look at the work, people might not understand what they're your background behind this and what spirituality and time and space mean in the art world and in relationship to a painting or piece as it relates from the artist's point of view. So, thank you, Dewey. I also want to, say, I forgot to say earlier that the works that we presented in Possessions, Zoe's section at Frieze, London, which is currently ending today, is a presentation of his works from 2009 exhibition of Tulips and Shadows, the visual metaphors of Dewey Crumpler, that was at the California African American Museum in Los Angeles, curated by Mar Hollingsworth. And that was in 2009, and I saw a video of that recently, and it was truly an awesome experience going through and seeing how you develop that tulip, and also the form of the collar, which, by the way, Octavia Butler uses in her work, Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talent. So, and my first encounter with that was when I went to African American Museum of History and Culture the first month it was open, and saw those in actual chains that were used for slaves, neck collars, all the way from adult to teenager to baby. It was truly transformative. And Dewey, your use of them in your work is also transformative. And I would just like Michael, if you could bring up the piece that is called Spirit Flash. And I want to, Dewey, just to speak a little bit about these paintings, because this is what this conversation is about, is a set of seven paintings that are currently on view in our Frieze London virtual viewing room, which you can see at frieze.com. But I wanted you to speak a little bit about the figure in this, and I wanted you to speak a little bit about the other formations so that people can see, maybe they can see the chain within this piece. This is, an abstract painting. I think that today in the art world, I think that, I see the experience of collectors bypassing abstraction by Black artists and going straight to the representational paintings. And I think that they are missing quite a bit of what the artists have to speak about outside representation. And I think this is a painting that has the tulip element and all that we've been talking about this afternoon about it. Could you speak a little bit about this, please?
Sure. Well, the great Baba Robert Ferris Thompson wrote a wonderful, masterful book called Flash of the Spirits. And in Flash of the Spirits, he really lays out, how the African thought process operates. And for me, I was thinking about what is articulated in that book, which is how when among some peoples in Africa, when you pass water, you are reborn. And that part of the power of an inkisi, for example, which is an object that you drive nails into. And this power has a Newtonian effect. That is, you have to use a power that is greater than the power you are trying to protect yourself from in order to move that power away from you or to transform its evil intent. So driving that nail into that flesh, the surface of the wood, is a penetration in time the surface of the object transforms in the molecular sense into the transmittal of that metal energy that sets into motion a cosmic operation, a consciousness that is projected outward to do work. And so when I was thinking about that flash, that in this case, silver leaf, which I had used earlier as a kid, I was fascinated with shiny stuff. So I used to use gold leaf and silver leaf in my paintings. And so in this particular painting, I started thinking about the African who is captured and is used as a humiliating, the capturing element, the collar, is used as an instrument of humiliation so that other slaves can be frightened by it. And in their fear, they will do as master says. But Africans have never submitted to psychosis that was projected on them. They may be psychotic as an individual, but they don't yield to macro psychosis, even if it subdues them in time.
That's so true. And that is why we have come through slavery, and we're coming through all that we're coming through.
And they use power. Part of the power is they use always their mind. That's why, for me, Black thought, how Blacks use their brain that creates the source material, the psychic material that can heal and weaponize against psychosis. And they do this through sound, through the use of vibratory sound. And if you ever go into a Black church, which I used to have to go to, dragged by my mother in the South in the dark with this shiny white object in front of me as it loomed bigger and bigger as I walked toward it in this hill. And I wound up in this room and I started hearing these African peoples stomping their feet in rhythm to Now I had to be in the room with that, and it's 100 people doing that. The only thing I ever heard that came close to it was Buddhist chants. And it creates an energy, and that energy heals. It's a healing energy. All that hell you caught in them fields, all that burning is burned off, washed off in the glory of that vibration. I didn't know that as a kid. I was scared because of the force was unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
But I brought that force out as an adult in these images because that collar on that Black person's head, and I paid attention to those images of the Blacks that I saw in that collar, and they were never looking downtrodden. They were looking in space and time like those African sculptures that stare into time and space infinitely. So that head on that African is what communicated to other Africans. And what that meant, what that said is freedom is what this collar means. That means I got a free head, and this bastard, this person could not, I would not yield. And because I wouldn't yield, I'm here as a symbol, but I'm a symbol and you see me. And those young kids looked at it and they say, yeah, I see. That's the roadmap to freedom. That's the roadmap, resistance. And they brought it. And that is why they turned a metal object into energy, and they popped it like a tulip, flipping in the wind, making its presence known in the universe, no matter how cold the environment. And tulips grow up in cold environments,
Yeah.
on rocky hillsides. They force their way into the world and bloom beautifully because they will not yield to gravity. They will work in relationship to it. That's why these paintings, that's why that person is at the top of the painting, moving like a woman or a man, undulating, making vibrations in the air, in the sun, in the moon. They are free. They are not captured inside this psychosis. They are blinking like a light. Mm-hmm. So that was what I was thinking about when I was doing that.
So could you, for those of us, thank you, Dewey. For those of us that weren't there, and unfortunately we weren't able to have this frieze presentation in person because of the pandemic and
yes,
spreading badly. Could you just, there was, you talked about the physicality of being around these large works. Could you just tell us a little bit about what it was? And I don't have somebody to testify for you, so you're gonna have to do it for yourself. About being around those large paintings. And Michael, if you could please bring up an image of the installation, please. Here we go. Because they're larger than what people might think when they're looking at the images. You had said something to me, Dewey, a few weeks ago when we were preparing for the frieze possession section. You had talked about the power of these works and the spirituality that people felt. Could you just put that in your own?
Yes. While the scale is not the only thing that can induce a state of being in a person viewing a work, there's an intimacy in it. And these works had to have scale. The reason is because paintings don't do anything. They just hang on a wall or lean on a wall, and they don't do nothing. Mostly paintings just hang up, and unless you put lights and bells on them, they don't enter the physical space. So they transform you into the psychic space. And the way they do that is they create conditions that are designed to animate your consciousness. And in doing so, your sensual being is drawn. So it has a kind of attraction. It pulls you, a work pulls you toward it. And that attraction, that magnetism is actually an action that is in your brain. The work, as Oliver Jackson calls it, the machine, actually does the work necessary to open a door, and you walk into the door and you have an experience inside that domain. That's why it doesn't flicker because it has to open up your flickering. You're the flicker. That's the part that is so essential. That's why the smell has to be in your head and you can smell it. The liquid transformed into a stable powder is something that you have to sense. And the more paintings you look at, the more this pops up, the more this happens. So it's the maker's job to really create those set of circumstances. And they don't always need explication from the maker because the maker can't travel with the object. So the maker has to invest in the object. All of this tension and experience that can be transformed and translated into the actual experience, because a painting is a dialogue and it should never be a diatribe. And that takes a long-term time to learn. As a young person, I didn't learn it well, but over time, I got it clear as a bell. And that's why you have to use scale according to the needs of your expression, of what you're trying to do to a completer. A completer. You are a beginner, you need a completer. And that's what you hope for as a maker. I don't know if I answered your question.
You did. It's a magical space, as you say, that transforms you. And it's up to you, the viewer, to enter into that and let your mind expand and explore and open.
So well said. That let your mind. That's a real complicated statement. Let your mind, because we come to things closed. That's why so many collectors need a story, that a specific thing that represents the world they're in can look like the world they're in. But if I might tell you a very brief story, because we're coming to an end, it looks like.
You can speak, Dewey, speak.
I as a,
And
oh, well, whoever was interested in me coming back, I want to thank them before I say anything, because it is indeed a pleasure to speak about one's work, and particularly in your format. Let me just say that as a kid, I was trying to understand the world as I experienced it as a Black person, because I was going to very elite schools, art schools, and I was bombarded with stuff I loved, no question about it. I deeply loved it. But I persistently argued, am I in it anywhere? And I would break into the class. And part of the reason I know so much about art history and I teach it, African art history particularly, is because I was always told by my history professors and others, no. And not because they were racist from their point of view, but because nobody taught them. No work that didn't operate within the framework that Alfred Barr and Philip Johnson had in the 1930s come back to design a museum that would create a chart that would forever, anywhere where modern art is taught, would be taught through that filter. That's the way the world had to be seen. And all the begotisms that were shaped in that dialogue at the beginning of the century, that's why this century is so important. And that's why with Africans in it, Africans like Zoe, like Sam, like that great Oliver, that Casals Oliver, that Breck Wraith, that great, all those great artists, Richard Powell,
Yes.
all of them, all of them. Finally,
Bradford.
finally, they come with the sword of truth.
Johnson. Yes.
All of them, they come
Yeah.
with a sword of truth that has been tempered just like me in the field of denial.
Jarrell's. Yes. Mm-hmm.
In the field of denial. And they have brought a mighty sword, and that comes with their capacity for absolute scholarship. No tacky scholarship. Absolute. You go into war. No tacky scholarship. Therefore, when as a kid, I'm trying to understand me, that's not a problem like it used to be. Thank goodness, those warriors. But I was looking for a counterpart. So every time a white person those art history professors told me how great Picasso, who I love, and all those people were, I had to find a corollary. And for me, it was in music. So I would immediately go to Howlin' Wolf or Miles Davis, good God, or Sarah Vaughan or James Brown. I would use them as examples of excellence, of greatness. And so they taught me what real excellence and power was from a Black point of view, from an African point of view. And every time they told me how great they were, I got it. And one day I was reading Buddhism. I was about 18, and I went into Tower Records down the hill from the Art Institute. And I looked through the bins, and I saw a record that said Meditations. And I pulled it out of the bin, and I took it home, and I laid back, and my mother had bought me a stereo record player, portable, which had just been designed. And so I put it on, I laid down on my bed, and I put it on, and it whop, and I jumped up out of the bed. I ejected off of my I ran on the back of my hill, up on the hill, because we lived in San Francisco on a hill, and I threw this record out in the street, and I saw it blast and blow up into 10,000 pieces. And I said, God, I will never listen to this. That is, why did I pay my $3 for that garbage? And for the next 5-6 months, that's all I could hear is that sound in my head. I couldn't hear nothing else. I couldn't hear no James Brown. I couldn't hear no Temptations or the Sorrells. I couldn't hear nothing. All I could hear is that whop, which was totally outside the music that I listened to. Totally. But so drip, drip, drip was that sound that I went back to Tower Records. I looked through that bin, and I bought every record John Coltrane made. And I brought it to my house, and I suffered through each one of those records until I fell deeply in love with Train. I went seeking the complicated because Train had reshaped my cognitive capacity. He had retuned my body so that I could be open to possibility. The other music was extraordinary, but it didn't open me to possibility. It didn't change my tune because I had difficulty with it, and it reshaped my capacity. And that's why I learned, never be closed, always be open. Your job as a maker is to be open like these musicians, because they don't take no prisoners. They do them, and if you're not up to it, that's your problem. You got to work to get to it, and I love that. Well, they don't do that so much anymore, but I loved it, and it absolutely shaped that stuff that I make right now. because I can hear that tune in my head every time I get confused.
Well, Dewey, you just put a button on it.
What you gonna do? What you gonna do? What you gonna do? The
Whoa.
music, always the music.
Well, I think this audience is so mesmerized. There are people talking about your voice and how soothing it is. I think you just opened up all their minds. They're out there like Sun Ra, man.
Hey, space is the place. And nobody is a better exponent than our brother in the stratosphere.
So you just took us to a stratosphere today, Zoe.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
And Zoe started us out, and this
Yes,
is
indeed.
quite a lovely hour. And thank you so much. And to those of you, I would encourage you to, when I know we're going to have to, I want to show these paintings in person, and virtually doesn't do them justice. So keep a watch out for when we can present these when we get a little bit more normalcy. So thank you, Dewey. Magic and Truth, they say thank you. Craig, there's a lot of people in here, so thank you all for coming. It said
Thank all
Dewey
of you.
Church, Magic and Truth, thank you, Dewey. So there's just a lot of thank yous going on.
Well,
So
thank them.
well,
Thank them for taking the time.
Thank you. And you and everybody, please get out there and vote.
Please vote.
Do your
Please.
duty.
This is a James Brown moment. Please, 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 please. that's the cap right there.
All right, everybody. Good. Well, Dewey, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
Thank you.
bye.
Everyone stay safe.
Okay, bye-bye.
Yes.